They hadn't spoken to me in 5 years, but suddenly they wanted me to sell my house to save my sister's failing business. When I refused, they broke in. What they didn't know was, this house held a secret that would change everything. Hello, I am Ita. I'm 34 years old, a homeowner, a financial advisor, and someone who used to believe that the hardest battles in life were behind me. I worked my way from nothing. No safety net, no handouts, no second chances. Just grit, spreadsheets, late nights, and quiet sacrifices. But I never imagined that the moment I finally built something lasting would become the moment my family decided to tear it all down. It started with a phone call. After 5 years of silence, during which I had grieved the family I thought I had lost, my mother's voice rang through the line like a ghost from the past. Sweetie, we'd love to have you over for dinner. Vanessa will be there too. There was no mention of the 5 years they had ignored me. No apology. No acknowledgement of the pain, the holidays spent alone, or the birthdays passed in silence. Just an invitation, as casual as if it hadn't been half a decade since they disowned me for refusing to give my savings to fund my sister's failed art gallery. Still, part of me wanted to believe things had changed, that they had. I didn't realize then that the only thing that had changed was the level of desperation they felt. You see, Vanessa, my younger sister, was always the star, the golden child, talented, charming, artistic. She was the kind of person who walked into a room and turned heads. My parents adored her. They paid for her art school in New York, covered her rent, her supplies, and her endless string of creative ventures. Meanwhile, I worked through high school, saved every dollar, put myself through college, and built a career in finance from scratch. And I was fine with that. Or I thought I was. I didn't need to be the favorite. I just wanted fairness. I wanted to be seen. But in our family, Vanessa was the one with dreams. I was the one with responsibilities. When she called crying 5 years ago, asking me for $30,000 to save her floundering art gallery, I hesitated. And that hesitation was enough. Within hours, my mother was on the phone calling me selfish. My father told me I was no longer part of the family. Vanessa blocked me. And just like that, I was erased. But I didn't crumble. I built. I poured myself into my work. I paid off my debts. I bought a house. A beautiful, nearly 100-year-old craftsman with leaded glass windows and oak trim that I refinished by hand. It became my sanctuary, space where I could breathe, where I could finally feel safe. Until they came back. The dinner invitation, the sudden warmth, the probing questions about my job, my house, my finances, it was all a setup. Because when the meal was over, the truth emerged. My family didn't come back to reconnect. They came back for my house. Vanessa had racked up $260,000 in debt from yet another failed business, and my parents, who had already sold off their savings and second mortgaged their home, had set their sights on mine. They wanted me to sell the only thing I had worked for to rescue the same sister who had never once rescued herself. When I refused, they broke in. They destroyed my home looking for my mortgage documents, thinking they could use them, forge them even, to save Vanessa's boutique. They thought I would never press charges. After all, family helps family, right? But this time I drew the line. And that line is where my story truly begins. Growing up in suburban Chicago, our family looked picture perfect from the outside. We lived in a modest 2-story house on a quiet cul-de-sac with freshly mowed lawns, 4th of July barbecues, and friendly neighbors who waved from their porches. My father worked in municipal services. My mother was a dental assistant, and on paper, we were the embodiment of middle-class stability. But behind the walls of our pleasant home was a system, one with unspoken rules and uneven expectations. And at the center of it was Vanessa, the golden child. Vanessa was magnetic from the start. She had a wild imagination, a dancer's poise, and a natural charm that drew people in effortlessly. My parents saw her as a star waiting to rise, and they made sure the world saw it too. Every piano recital, art competition, or school play became a family production. My mom ironed her costumes, my dad took hundreds of pictures. They posted her achievements on the fridge like prized artwork. Me? I was the responsible one, the independent daughter. I got good grades. I did my homework without being asked. I made my own lunches and helped clean up after Vanessa's art projects. but no one ever applauded me for doing what needed to be done. I wasn't celebrated. I was expected. She's just so independent, my mom would say with a tight smile when relatives asked about me. She doesn't need much. But I did. I needed recognition. I needed the same effort they poured into Vanessa to be shared, even just a little. Instead, I learned early on that my role in the family wasn't to shine. It was to support the one who did. By 16, I was working part-time jobs to save for college. I stocked shelves at the local pharmacy after school and waitressed on weekends. I never complained because I knew no one was going to pay my tuition but me. When I brought up college plans with my parents, I was met with vague encouragement and hard truths. We have to prioritize Vanessa's art school, my father said. Her tuition is higher. But you're smart, Etta. You'll figure it out. So I did. I juggled scholarships, student loans, and late-night shifts at the campus coffee shop. I didn't begrudge Vanessa for getting support. What hurt was the assumption that I didn't need any. Meanwhile, Vanessa thrived in an expensive art school in New York City. She lived in a cozy apartment paid for by our parents. She went to gallery openings, had headshots taken by professionals, and talked about finding her artistic voice while I worried about rent and textbook costs. Phone calls home were always about her struggles, her dreams, her new projects. If I mentioned my life, the conversation quickly drifted back to Vanessa. She's just going through a lot right now, my mother would say. Be patient with her. When Vanessa graduated and floated the idea of opening her own gallery, my parents didn't hesitate. They dipped into their retirement savings, $60,000, to fund her dream. I found out through Instagram. A party, a ribbon cutting, smiling selfies with champagne flutes raised high. I wasn't invited. I didn't even get a thank you text when I sent a card wishing her luck. 3 months later, the gallery failed. And that was the first time Vanessa called me in years, not to apologize or reconnect, but to ask for $30,000 to save everything. That's when the guilt campaign began. When I said I needed a repayment plan, the narrative flipped. I wasn't a sister. I was selfish. I had abandoned the family. They cut me out. I spent the next 5 years rebuilding my life from scratch. No holidays, no family birthdays, no calls. But what they didn't realize was that those 5 years without them were the most honest, empowering, and healing of my life. I stopped chasing their approval and started building something for myself. And they came back, not to reconnect, but to take. It was a Tuesday night like any other. I had just finished watering my tomato plants in the backyard and was preparing dinner. Nothing fancy, just roasted vegetables and brown rice. The quiet hum of my house wrapped around me like a warm blanket, my sanctuary after a long day. Everything about this life felt earned, peaceful, stable. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, figuring it was spam, but something in my gut told me to answer. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the part of me that still longed for closure, or something close to it. Hello? I said. A pause. Then, Ida, it's Mom. I froze. The wooden spoon I was holding slipped from my hand and clattered onto the kitchen floor. 5 years of silence. 5 years of unanswered calls, returned holiday cards, and being ghosted by the people who raised me. And now here she was, speaking like we'd just spoken last week. Mom? Yes, sweetie. How are you? Sweetie. Like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't blocked me on social media. Like they hadn't painted me as the villain to every relative within reach. I'm surprised to hear from you, I managed, my voice brittle. She continued like it was nothing. Well, your father and I have been thinking about you. We'd love to have you over for dinner this Friday. Vanessa will be there too. It's been too long since we were all together as a family. As a family. The words landed like a punch. As if the estrangement had been mutual, as if they hadn't told everyone I turned my back on them in their hour of need. And yet I said yes. Not because I believed in a happy ending, but because I needed to know. I needed to hear it from them, to see their faces, to understand what this was about. Because this wasn't random. This wasn't a spontaneous reach out. This had a purpose. I called my therapist the next day. What do you hope will happen at this dinner? Dr. Rivers asked during our emergency session. Best case scenario, I said, they acknowledge what happened, maybe even apologize. And the more realistic expectation? I sighed. They want something. She nodded. Then we need a plan. Together, we mapped boundaries. I wouldn't talk about my finances unless asked directly. I wouldn't apologize for my decision 5 years ago. If things became manipulative or abusive, I'd leave. I had spent too long rebuilding myself to be dismantled over one meal. That Friday, I stood in front of my childhood home, my heart hammering against my ribcage. I wore something neutral. Clean, polished, but modest. I carried a bottle of wine, not too cheap, not too expensive, polite, but impersonal. The house looked tired, the lawn overgrown, paint peeling from the trim. The flowers my mom used to obsess over were dead. The decay was subtle but striking, like something once loved had been quietly abandoned. My father opened the door. The man who once towered over me now seemed diminished, gray, hollow-eyed. "Ida," he said, like a formal greeting. "Come in." There was no hug, no warmth, just that brittle civility I knew all too well. Inside, the air smelled like an old perfume, too much, too sweet. My mother appeared from the kitchen, her smile stretched and thin. "There she is," she said, hugging me too tightly for too briefly. "Still so serious? You should smile more." My jaw tightened. Same old digs, same old games. Still, I followed them into the living room, where familiar furniture had been replaced with cheaper pieces. The expensive art that once lined the walls was gone. So were the heirloom vases and the antique sideboard, empty spaces where memories used to live. Vanessa wasn't there yet. "She's running late," my mom said, pouring wine into mismatched glasses. "She had an appointment she couldn't miss. But she's thrilled to see you." As we waited, the questions began. Soft probes disguised as small talk. "So where are you living these days? Still in that financial firm? Gotten any promotions? Must be hard to buy a house in this market. You're still renting, right?" Each question felt like a landmine. I answered vaguely, carefully. "Yes, I bought a home. Yes, I've been promoted. No, I'm not married. No, I'm not seeing anyone." They nodded politely, but I could see the flickers of calculation behind their eyes. And then Vanessa arrived. Late, loud, drenched in designer, hugging me like we were best friends and she hadn't spent 5 years vilifying me. The trap was set, and dinner hadn't even started yet. The dining table hadn't changed much since I was a kid. Same mahogany surface, same rickety chairs. But tonight, everything about it felt different. The air was thick with unspoken intentions, and each place setting might as well have been a chess piece. I was the queen they were trying to capture. Dinner was surprisingly simple. Roast chicken, green beans, store-bought rolls. A far cry from the holiday feast my mom once labored over. But I knew better than to believe the simplicity was casual. It was strategic, designed to disarm. Vanessa, perched like royalty in her designer dress, dove into conversation with performative flair. "It's been so long," she gushed. "I can't believe how much time we've lost. Honestly, I've missed you, Etta." I nodded. "It's been a while." She launched into stories of her recent ventures, art collaborations, boutique openings, photo shoots. There were name drops of influencers and whispers about celebrity clients. She painted a picture of glamorous struggle, talented, adored, but underfunded. I recognized the script. I'd seen her perform it for investors, professors, old friends. It always ended the same way, with a pitch. "So what's new with you?" she asked, twirling her fork like it was a microphone. "Work's good. The house has been a big project." "You bought a house?" Her voice jumped an octave. "In this economy?" I nodded, sipping my water. "It took years of saving. But yes." The table fell silent for a moment. My parents exchanged a glance so quick it could have been missed if I hadn't been looking for it. "You must be doing very well for yourself," my father said, tone neutral but eyes sharp. "I've been fortunate," I replied carefully, "and disciplined." My mother leaned in. "And it's a real house, not a condo?" "Single family, craftsman, 1920s. "Wow," Vanessa said, laughing. "You're such a grown-up now." The conversation pivoted, but the tension lingered. I could feel it building like steam in a kettle. And then it happened. Vanessa set down her wine glass with a sigh. "I need to be honest," she said, her voice quieter now. "Things haven't been easy lately." Here it comes. "My boutique, it was doing great, but then COVID delays, inflation, my investor bailed, rents doubled, and the renovation costs exploded." I'm $260,000 in debt. She didn't look at me. She looked at my parents. We've done what we could, my father said solemnly. Sold heirlooms, second mortgage on the house. We're tapped out, my mother added, eyes glassy. That's why we reached out. There it was, the pitch. My stomach turned. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, but what does that have to do with me? My mother's voice softened, cloying. You've worked so hard, built so much, you're in a position to help. Maybe if you sold your house. I laughed. I didn't mean to. It just burst out, sharp and involuntary. Sell my house? I said. So Vanessa can bail out her boutique? Vanessa's eyes narrowed. You're sitting on equity. You could buy something smaller, still live comfortably. It's not like we're asking you to be homeless. You're asking me to dismantle everything I've built. It's family, my mother whispered. Family helps family. I put down my fork, suddenly cold. Is that what you tell yourselves? That abandoning me for 5 years was just family stuff? That erasing me from holidays was help? You've only contacted me now because you want something. That's not true, my father said, but his voice lacked conviction. You didn't even ask how I was doing. You didn't ask what it took for me to buy that house. You just saw a number and decided I was your solution. My mother's hands trembled. Please, Etta, you are our only hope. No, I said, standing up. Vanessa's debt is not my responsibility. My stability is not a sacrifice I'm willing to make for someone who's never once taken accountability. Vanessa slammed her wine glass down. So what? You're just gonna let us drown? I didn't pour the water, I said quietly. I just learned to swim. I left that dinner shaking, not from fear, but from rage laced with sorrow. My hands trembled on the steering wheel all the way home. I hadn't expected an apology. I wasn't naive, but I also hadn't anticipated the shamelessness of it all. My family, after half a decade of silence, had treated me like an ATM with a pulse. As I walked through the front door of my house, my home, I felt a strange shift. The betrayal still stung, but underneath it was something solid. Clarity. This house, the space, was more than bricks and wood. It was the physical embodiment of every late night I stayed in to save money, every job I took to pay bills, every dream I delayed. It wasn't a thing to be sold. It was a life I had earned. By the next morning, my resolve had hardened, but my family wasn't done. The texts came first. From my mother, you're breaking this family. Then from my father, we sacrificed everything for you. Vanessa followed with venom. You've always been jealous. Admit it. Then came the public posts. Vanessa crafted a beautifully staged Instagram story, moody lighting, melancholy music, and a quote about some family being poison in disguise. She tagged mutual friends, ensuring everyone knew exactly who she meant. A few cousins I hadn't spoken to in years reached out. Some offered sympathy. Others pressed the family helps family guilt trip, asking why I couldn't just help this one time. They didn't know the full story. But that wasn't the point. I did, and I had finally accepted it. Vanessa wasn't a misunderstood artist. She was a financially reckless adult. My parents weren't victims of circumstance. They were architects of a broken dynamic where enabling replaced love and manipulation replaced trust. And I was done being the scapegoat. I blocked numbers, turned off comments, took a few days off work, and met with my therapist. Why does it still hurt? I asked her, tears pricking my eyes. I know I did the right thing, but I still feel like the villain. Because your entire life, she said gently, they taught you that saying no was betrayal, that boundaries meant abandonment, but now you're rewriting the rules. That's painful, but powerful. She was right. The pain didn't come from what I had done. It came from what I had finally refused to do. So I leaned in. I called a lawyer, I updated my locks, I installed a security system, and most importantly, I did not answer when they showed up at my door again. Yes, they came, 3 days later, standing on my porch like nothing had happened. My father knocked like it was a casual visit. My mother held a grocery bag, probably filled with something homemade. Vanessa wore sunglasses so oversized they could hide 1,000 lies. I watched from inside, phone in hand, heart pounding, but I didn't move. They knocked, waited, knocked again, then left. They weren't here to make amends. They were here to test boundaries. And this time I held the line. After they left, I opened the drawer where I kept my documents. The deed, the historical protection papers, the certified copy of my will. I had nearly forgotten about the designation that made my home a protected property. No quick flips, no structural changes without approval, no clean cash out. I laughed to myself bitterly. The very uniqueness of my house, the thing that made me fall in love with it, was also the reason their plan was doomed from the start. Let them scheme, let them beg, let them weaponize guilt. I had built this life. I had survived abandonment, self-doubt, and years of being the second best daughter. And now I was no longer asking for permission to live on my own terms. That was their humiliation. And this was my power. I had thought the confrontation at dinner was the worst it could get. I was wrong. Days after the confrontation, the texts and calls evolved from guilt-laced to outright vicious. My mother left voicemails crying about her ungrateful daughter who'd rather let her family suffer than sell a house. Vanessa posted a cryptic Instagram reel from a luxury spa captioned, "Some people hoard wealth while others drown. Let karma handle them." My inbox flooded with extended relatives and even strangers regurgitating the story, how I had abandoned my parents, how I refused to help my sister. But the worst part wasn't what was said, it was the obsessive frequency. Every hour, every app, every channel. So I went dark. I blocked numbers, disabled tags, reported harassment. I tried to move on, focus on work, tend to my garden, bake something maybe. Yet every shadow out of place felt like surveillance. Every creak in the floorboard made me wonder if someone was watching or planning something. Then came the break-in. It happened on a Tuesday, just after sunset. I came home from work and immediately noticed something off. My porch light wasn't on. I had set it to auto. Then I saw the lock on my door was scraped, barely hanging. Inside, my sanctuary was in ruin. Bookshelves overturned, couch cushions ripped, picture frames shattered. A word scrawled across my living room wall in red lipstick, "Selfish." I froze. It was not a robbery. Nothing of real value was taken, but drawers were opened. Files were missing, cabinets emptied, my home office ransacked. They were looking for something. I called the police. When officers arrived, they confirmed what I feared. It was a targeted act, not random. The entry was forced, but selective. My neighbors hadn't seen who entered, but one security camera captured a blurry image of 3 figures entering through the side fence. 3. I didn't need names. I knew who it was. The next day, my lawyer confirmed something even worse. The drawer where my mortgage documents had been stored was among the places rifled through. And though nothing appeared stolen, I remembered too late that I'd left a scanned file open on my computer before leaving for work. They had been hunting for leverage, proof of equity, ownership, a way to access or challenge what I'd earned. It wasn't just emotional manipulation anymore. It was criminal. The betrayal hit deeper than any dinner table ambush. My parents, my sister. The people who had raised me, even if imperfectly, had violated the one space I had made my own. The place I had filled with lavender candles and old records and dreams that had no space in their house. And now they had left it shattered. My lawyer moved swiftly. We filed for a restraining order. I pressed charges for trespassing, destruction of property, attempted fraud, surveillance footage, emails, text records, all compiled into a thick folder of evidence. I felt hollow handing it over. Part of me still couldn't believe it, that it had come to this, that the people who had once packed my school lunches and taught me to ride a bike were now being investigated for felonies against their own daughter. But the truth had spoken, loudly, violently. And now? There was no pretending it was all a misunderstanding, no denying their intentions. They had crossed the line, and I was done pulling them back. Holding your ground doesn't always feel like strength. Sometimes it feels like bleeding slowly. After the break-in and after filing police reports, I returned to a home that no longer felt safe. I double-locked every door, slept with a bat next to my bed, and jumped at every creak. I was surviving, not living. But even worse than the fear was the doubt. Was I really heartless? Could I have done something differently? Would it have killed me to offer just a little help? These questions circled my head late at night like vultures. Even though logic screamed, "You did the right thing," guilt whispered, "But what if they're right?" the emotional cost was brutal. I withdrew, skipped off his happy hours, declined dinner invites. My therapist said I was exhibiting signs of trauma, not just from the break-in, but from a lifetime of conditional love. Because that's the thing people don't tell you about integrity. It's not just about standing up for yourself. It's about what you lose in the process. I lost my peace. I lost my sense of security. I lost what little illusion I had left that my family might one day come around. Worse, the court proceedings started to stir public interest among distant relatives and mutual friends. The rumors multiplied. At work, someone asked if I was really suing my own mom. At the grocery store, an old neighbor muttered, "She always was a little cold." It felt like I had to keep justifying the boundary I had every right to set. But amid the cost, there was clarity. People who stood by me, really stood by me, showed up stronger than ever. Mrs. Abernathy left fresh muffins at my doorstep, with notes that simply said, "Keep holding the line." My friend Tara sat through the court hearing just to hold my hand. My coworker Jackson offered to install a new security system for free. These were not people tied to me by blood, but they were the ones who showed love without terms. I also began to see that saying no wasn't selfish, it was honest. Vanessa's $260,000 crisis wasn't born in a vacuum. It was the result of years of avoiding consequences. Every bailout made the next one bigger. Every just this once became a pattern, and I wasn't willing to continue that pattern, not with my money, not with my home, not with my sanity. Integrity costs, sometimes more than you expect. It can cost your family, your reputation, your sense of comfort. But the alternative is abandoning yourself to keep the peace. And I had done that for far too long. The police lights faded, the broken furniture was cleared, but what no one tells you is that the hardest part isn't the cleanup. It's waking up in the same space that once held your trauma. Every corner of my house held the fingerprints of betrayal, the shredded couch cushions, the cracked frames, the lipstick message on the wall. Selfish. For a while, I avoided the living room altogether. I slept in the guest room. I flinched every time the doorbell rang. But I refused to move. This house wasn't just real estate. It was the embodiment of years of work, sacrifice, discipline, and belief that I could build a life worth living on my own terms. So I stayed, and I rebuilt. The first thing I did was repaint the living room, not just to cover the damage, but to reclaim the space. I chose a rich, earthy green, the color of growth and renewal. Each brushstroke was like therapy. With every inch of paint, I whispered, "You don't get to ruin this for me." Next, I replaced the destroyed furniture, not with whatever was trendy or convenient, but with pieces that made me feel safe and proud. I splurged a little. I earned it. I added a security system, cameras, smart locks, motion lights, not out of paranoia, but as a declaration. This is my space. I protect it now. Emotionally, the rebuilding was slower. I journaled. I cried. I meditated. I let myself feel the loss, not just of things, but of illusions. The illusion that maybe one day my family would choose me simply because I mattered, not because I was useful. But I also felt something else stirring: freedom. I no longer lived for the next guilt trip. I no longer carried the weight of being the bad daughter. I was no longer responsible for fixing their messes. That freedom was intoxicating. My community showed up in ways my family never had. Mrs. Abernathy helped replant the flower beds. Jackson installed outdoor cameras. Tara brought over frozen meals for the week. It wasn't blood that rebuilt my life. It was choice. People I chose. People who chose me back. No strings, no shame, just care. Months later, I sat on the front porch of my restored home, sipping coffee and watching the garden bloom again. It looked better than it ever had, not just because of paint or furniture, but because it now held truth. This house had survived betrayal. So had I. I wasn't selfish. I was self-protective. And that was the most generous thing I could have done for myself. 1 year after the break-in, I stood once again on the front porch of my home, the place that had witnessed both my highest pride and deepest violation. But this time, I didn't feel fear or pain. I felt peace. The restraining order was still in place. The lawsuit settled, and the house, with its new coat of paint and upgraded locks, stood tall like a symbol of everything I had reclaimed. Not just space or safety, but myself. The house had come full circle. So had I. I remember how I used to dream of having a family that would lift me up, that would celebrate my milestones, that would simply say, "We're proud of you." I now realize that dream doesn't have to die. It just changes shape. Because family isn't who you're born to, it's who you build with. It's the friends who show up when things fall apart. The neighbors who leave bread on your doorstep. The coworkers who say, "Take the day off, we've got you." That's the family I have now. And as for the one I left behind, they didn't win. Vanessa was forced to get a job. My parents had to move to a smaller place and live within their means for the first time. In their own way, they were rebuilding too. And though I no longer held space for them in my daily life, I did allow myself to hope they were learning something from it all. Then came the letter. Vanessa, through a lawyer, sent an apology. No demands. No guilt trips. Just, "I'm sorry." She acknowledged her entitlement, admitted the damage she caused, and for the first time in my life, didn't try to spin it into a sob story. I didn't respond right away. I didn't rush to forgive. Because healing doesn't follow a calendar. It follows consistency. But that letter was a step. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something new. Still, whether or not that relationship is ever repaired, I no longer need it to be. Because I am whole. My house, my sanctuary, taught me that. It gave me the space to grieve, to grow, and finally to come home. Not to them, to me. So if you're out there, doubting your own boundaries, wondering if you're the bad guy for saying no, for choosing yourself, I want you to hear this. You are not selfish. You are brave. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to finally stop bleeding for people who never learn how to heal themselves. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep others warm, even if they're family. Establishing financial and emotional boundaries is not cruelty, it's self-preservation. True family respects your no as much as your yes. If you've ever felt excluded, overlooked, or underestimated by people who should have embraced you, this story is for you. Like, subscribe, and drop a comment below telling me, have you ever had to choose between being accepted and being yourself? I'd love to hear your story.